Welcome. Let me introduce you Mr. Grant Gemmell, who is Managing Director of Facet5 Global, a well-known brand in 60+ countries worldwide. Grant is visiting Poland, and thanks to his kindness, I will have a chance to make this interview. How are you, Grant, today?
I'm well, really well. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. I often hear from people that Facet5 is all about making sure the right person with the right talent is in the right place in the right time. So basically, we can say that Facet5 is about making sure about the right fit. Am I right?
Yes, you are. But I think it's a little bit more than just the right fit. I think context is always king when it comes to the right person in the right role. Because we all know that we flourish in different ways and in different environments. So it's about helping you understand, I suppose, and giving you a language and an understanding of yourself so that you can understand why you flourish, why you fit in certain environments. Now, I've had plenty of jobs where I've gone in and felt like it doesn't feel quite right for me. It feels like there's something missing. I don't feel like I belong or I fit in this environment. And plenty of others like now where I feel like I'm using all of my strengths, accessing all of my talents. And I feel like it's just a little bit more closer to who I am. And I think at Facet5, what we try to do is give people that sense of who they are, what their strengths are, what their preferences are, how they like to work. And I think from that, we allow people to really understand how to flourish, how to realize their potential.
Interesting. Grant, you have a very diverse background in terms of places you have lived,
Yes.
People you have worked, companies, different cultures. Let me ask you, have you ever been in the wrong place at the wrong time? And what was that like for you?
Wow, I have been in so many wrong places at so many wrong times, usually all my own fault. And yes, I have traveled. I've been very privileged to travel to over 90 countries. I've lived in 6 countries throughout my career. But I think it's not so much wrong place or wrong time. It's kind of readjusting that and going, actually, what did I learn from that? Maybe I was a bit naive, maybe a bit too curious at times, but actually I wouldn't change any of those experiences. I think that comes with you. It informs who you are. It informs who you can be as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. So my first degree is in horticultural sciences and botany. So I studied plant sciences at university and what we call post-production harvest technology. So working with scientific institutes around when you take a cut flower, how long can it last? If you pick a vegetable, how can you get it to the supermarket fresh and ready to eat? I've always been fascinated by horticulture and gardening. It's a long line in our families, and we've owned garden centres as families as well. When I first started travelling, though, I went over to the United Kingdom, where I live now, and I started picking fruit as a summer job. And we started picking fruit for the palace, what we call the palace complex. So they own the orchards, and it was for the royal yachts and things like that. Got to the first winter coming from Australia. It was kind of a surprise for me. So it was like, okay, I can't work outside in the winter. And what I found is that I rotated through a few jobs. I worked for the Royal Bank of Scotland, and then I worked for Guinness and United Distillers. But what I found was that I was going from one job to another, but always working with people, leading people, collaborating with people in order to do what I wanted to do. So over a period of time, I retrained into communication, and then I did my master's in leadership. And I was lucky enough to fall in to where I am now, because trust me, I've had no real career plan, fall into where I am now. And we spoke about fit before. I kind of found my tribe, I found my fit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you are visiting Poland for the next few days.
Yes.
And preparing to this interview, I was a virtual guest in your country trying to find some interesting materials. And I found something interesting, which is called tall puppy syndrome.
Yes.
And basically, it means that if someone is standing out in terms of success,
yes.
We need to cut him off.
Yeah.
And my question to you is, how did you overcome that syndrome, and what did you have to do to succeed in such a high level?
It's a great question. I think tall poppy syndrome exists in a lot of cultures. We just call it something different. It exists in the work we did in Tanzania last year, for example. It exists in Australia. It exists in the UK. And I think it's a sense of uneasiness around success that people may have. But I think when you surround yourself with people who celebrate that success, and you don't have to make an excuse for that, then I think you can really thrive. So I think not only is the context important for personal success, I think it's who you surround yourself with. Those people that recognize and elevate you up as opposed to trying to pull you down. And I think when you talk to a lot of people, you kind of have to separate yourself from the criticism of other people. What other people think of you is kind of none of your business. You have to hold your own, be confident in who you are, excuse me, and lean into that, lean into your personality, lead into the brilliance of that. Be less apologetic for that as well.
Okay. And from your perspective, what is the single biggest problem that today's corporate leaders are facing today, and how really big this problem is?
Wow. I don't think there's one aspect. I think leadership has become a really complex beast. When we speak with leaders, when I coach leaders, there's sometimes it feels like an insurmountable amount of work and requirement and expectation on leaders. And we don't help ourselves, because when you look on LinkedIn and you look on some social media sites, it's always great leaders do this and bad managers do that and be this and behave this way. So we're trying to conform people to an opinion or a point of view. And I think if we were to take away that noise and just allow people to really express who they are, understand who they are, what their preferences are, understand that actually leadership is an amalgamation of experience and knowledge, and that when we bring ourselves into that, our true selves into that process, then actually we form our own view of leadership. The biggest challenge then, coming back to your actual question, is the ability to flex and to understand how to do that using your own personality and your own style. I think when we flex, understand where we come from and what's required of us, we have a more sort of conscious making process that we're choosing our behaviors, we're understanding sometimes why we do that with less effort. So we say it's effortless, and then why some things are more effortful. When they're more effortful, it can lower our well-being, lower our resilience. So it's about helping people understand who they are, what their strengths are, give them a language and a method for understanding that, so that they can form their own unique leadership style, and then help them with that flexing process, that conscious making process, building capability, so that over a period of time, they become more agile and it becomes a bit more of their DNA, and they can be more responsive into different situations in different relationships.
Okay, so let me ask you, what does Facet5 do better or different than our competitors?
Everything. No, just joking. I think the thing that we try to achieve the most is a language that works for the individual, about empowering the individual with a common language that other people understand. And we know that you speak multiple languages, I speak English, but we have a common language between us. And I think Facet5 can also be that common language for people. We know, and I've noticed, and I still notice actually, and I probably do it myself, is that when we start to talk about behaviour, it creates some tension for people. So I think when we give people a language which is non-emotive and non-judgmental, that describes a person and the richness of that person, then actually it creates a way of creating understanding and just that little bit more curiosity, that stepping forward to each other, a willingness to understand through language creates real value. And we know that even when you learn a small piece of new language and you're going on holidays, it opens up new insights, it opens up new worlds for you. And I think the same with Facet5. Language is such a key thing. The language that we use is empowering, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and talking about languages, we know that person from Poland can learn, let's say, Italian, and person from Italy can learn French. But I'm curious, is there a chance that one let's say, personality can learn the language of another personality?
I don't think we can learn each other's experience. I think when we talk about empathy, which is kind of the same concept, and we are consciously making an effort to understand somebody else's context and how somebody approaches the world and sees the world, I don't think that's a bad thing. We are all kind of unique, so we can't replicate somebody else's experiences, but I think we can be generally curious, open, and learn from their experience. But we have to be able to assimilate that or bring that in and make that real and make that relevant for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about people, because I'm from Poland, you're from Australia, someone else is, let's say, from China or Tanzania. Isn't that true that people are people and deep down we are all the same, or is that true that deep down we are totally different? What do you think?
When I first started traveling for work, I've always traveled. My mum's parting words for me was, you should go and see the world. And if you come home, at least it's a conscious, informed choice. She wasn't aware that I would spend so much time and go so far. But I think in terms of meeting people for the first time, I was quite anxious about the culture and the rules and how things were done and if I'd make a mistake. But actually, when you observe people, they get up out of bed in the morning, they have breakfast usually, they may get their kids to school, they get some public transport or they have to get to work, they go to work, they come home, they eat, they do after work activities, they volunteer, they sing, they dance, they do a whole range of different things. How we go about doing those sort of things is certainly influenced by where we are, the privilege that we may have, for example, in having access to those. But I think at our heart, we all have the same desire for a good life, an honest life, a fair workplace, good relationships, to be loved and to be able to love someone else. What I did notice and what I found very comforting, I suppose, was that we are all at our heart very, very similar. We just like to call things a little bit different. And actually, Facet5, when I started doing debriefs with people and I started seeing personality profiles, and not that we're the be-all and end-all of that, is that we had a way of describing ourselves that was very common and very consistent. And it created that moment of openness and familiarity and consistency between us. And I think that's just amazing that you can go to Sao Paulo, you can go to Tokyo, you can go to Dar es Salaam, you can go to Chicago. And at our heart, people are desiring and aiming for the same things and the same brilliance that we all have. It's just how that comes together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fascinating. And can you tell us a little bit, would you give me an example of what you consider the most thrilling or inspiring moment in your career?
I don't think there's one.
Okay.
He says, kind of racking my brain thinking about what those big moments are. It sounds quite trite, but it's actually the moment you sit with somebody with their personality profile. So I've done a lot of assessment. I've provided a lot of assessment and done a lot of development in my career. And it's not so much the big moments, it's those small incremental moments that create that aha moment for you. And I see that in people. Now I've done lots of, and been very privileged to do a lot of debriefs with individuals. And I won't lie, now I think, oh, I don't think I could do another one. After thousands of them, it's like, oh, that's a lot of effort. But each time you can make a change or inform somebody's view of themselves to be more positive, changing that personal narrative, celebrating their strengths, recognizing their brilliance, recognizing their uniqueness. I think it's those small incremental conversations, because you know you've had an impact on somebody, that you've helped turn that light up just a little bit brighter. And I think if we can do that in people, then we've done a great job and we've done a good day's work.
Now let's talk about what's going on globally, because we are here not to talk about politics, but we are not blind. We know that on the world there are at least two major wars going on, I mean Ukraine and Israel, and people are more polarized than ever before. And for example, in the United States, we already know that Joe Biden will be a Democratic nominee and Donald Trump will be a Republican nominee. They hate each other. And I recently read an article, the headline was, "Don't try to talk to the other side. Don't even try, don't bother." Because of so-called unbridgeable gaps. So we may not want to talk with people outside of our tribe, but truly speaking, in workplace, we may not have a choice. From your huge experience working with different cultures, nationalities, I mean, how many countries you have visited?
93.
Fascinating. What can Facet5 teach us about bridging gaps between people, or maybe some gaps are indeed unbridgeable?
Yeah, it's a great question and good insight. I think, yes, we are. It does feel like we're more polarized than we have ever been. I don't know if that's because we have more media coverage. We think back to the Cold War, for example. I think human evolution, the time we've been on this planet, we've always had these moments of conflict and disagreement. I think everything, when you are present in your own time, feels like it's always bigger than what's been before, for example. I think what we are generally having a conversation with, and I think all people recognize it, is not it's not a hidden conversation or a quiet conversation. I was very lucky to do some work in Kuala Lumpur a couple of weeks ago, and it was a conversation. You know, how do we bridge the uncertainty for our teams? How do we create a vehicle or a way or an environment where people can bring themselves to work and have those conversations, even when they are quite different to each other? So I can't give any advice on politics and to the leaders of the world, but I think what we notice is that when we talk about just being just a little bit more open, approaching things with curiosity as opposed to looking for malintent, means that you are going to be more open to what somebody else has said. We talk about being more humble or having more humility, and that my point of view may not always be right. And it's very hard to step away from that. You know, we form those and we're expected now to have more firm points of view and not to waver from those. And this old Western ideal of this charismatic, outgoing, decisive leader, for example, that sets the direction and everybody else follows along, I think that's thankfully sort of fading away. So I think if we were able to step back from our own point of view, just very gently open ourselves up to somebody else's point of view and be more curious around that and understand what informs that, then actually we can still hold our own point of view, but we're not doing that from stubbornness or ignorance. We're doing that through an informed conversation. And I think it's that power of those conversations. It's a willingness to sit down in a fair and open and respectful dialogue that we seem to be missing. And that can be challenging at work, challenging outside of home. And I think when we start to take that brave step, that courageous step of being vulnerable and opening up the conversation, if we come back to one of your questions before, is that other people generally are interested in that. They will sit down with you. It's just that we have grown up in a culture, or we are growing up in a culture of being more defensive, more partisan, more deliberately separate. And I think we just need to start figuring out how we can close some of those gaps. And I think generally one of the ways is just being a bit more open, a bit more curious.
And you are working with so many cultures, different nationalities, different countries, different companies. And I wonder, because when the person from China is working with a person from France, let's say, then both don't speak English, we have a communication problem, right?
Yeah.
So the same happens in a workplace on a daily basis. Let's say on the wheel scale, we have low and high wheels scores. So I wonder, is this a right assessment that personality is like a common language that is connecting people, and we can say that thanks to the power of personality, we know how to speak with the person. That doesn't matter if he or she is from the other culture, other country. Am I right? Or
Yes, yeah, of course. I mean, I think you're right in that when we create that language and we help people understand themselves in comparison to other people or in contrast, we're not competing people against each other. We're not saying that low will is better than high will or mid-range or anywhere else on our scale. We just have a particular preference. We approach the world or we approach decision-making or goal setting in a particular way in this instance. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just how we go about doing that. I think our willingness to understand, does our style, our approach suit the context in which we're making that decision or setting that goal? And if not, is there another way, another person with a different approach that I might be able to leverage or use or can assist me? Then I think that's where we get great value out of having that understanding. So when we work with people and we're working with them to understand how they like to approach it, how they like to approach a particular aspect of their work, it's not to say that this is the only way of doing that. It's about positioning yourself in order to be able to flex your style, because we know that work is a game of flexing. You're coming in and the decisions that you make one day may be quite different to decisions that you make the next. So somebody with low will who likes to inform their decisions through more consensus, through data, through conversation, may be perfect where a decision has the time and needs the breadth and the depth. But you might look to somebody with much higher will, where a more gut instinct, quite quick decision is actually needed, and you can default to that style. What we appreciate then is that when we've got access to those different styles, then we need to figure out how do we leverage those? How do we open ourselves to working with other people with different styles in order to get a better outcome?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and let's talk about AI. How, in your opinion, AI is changing the industry, and what are trends for the future, and how this impact personality market?
I think AI has been kind of a hidden gem almost in the background for a long time. So we think about machine learning, which is quite prevalent in research. It's always been there, and we use it in order to create trends or find trends and to look at large amounts of data in order to take, huge amounts of data and making it quite accessible for people. I think like any innovation, just like years of things that have gone before us, there's always a hesitancy to adopt new technologies and new trends. And we're seeing that in legislation, we're seeing that in some of the agreements that we're signing with large clients at the moment. But I do think it has a place into the future. I think it's about enabling us to be better at what we do, taking away some of the probably more mundane and creating new opportunities, new ways of thinking, new ways of connecting data. And I think that's the exciting thing for us, is how do we use AI in a controlled or learnt way in order to create rich insights from larger sets of data for the future. And we see it in the medical industry, some great examples of the power of AI, being able to find methods and diagnoses that are missed by the human eye or human review, because they're doing it much more quickly across larger sets of data and informing that process more quickly. So I think there's natural hesitancy there, which is great. It's okay to be a bit skeptical, because that allows us to question a bit more. But I think it's also can be a very empowering thing. We've just got to find the right home and the right method, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And can you tell us what is your why, what you love in your work, and what keeps you going?
I think all through my career, I've had some great jobs, and I've had some not so great jobs. I've had some great relationships and not so great relationships. But when I think about it, all of that's come down to me, how I responded in the moment, how I felt I fit, my willingness to learn and grow. I think what I love about what I do now is that I get to work with people across the world. I've built some amazing relationships and friendships. I get different perspectives and it enriches my worldview. I think it's about how do we take that, how do we take what we capture through our questionnaire, for example, and create something which is rich and insightful and meaningful for another person? How do I enable an individual to be a better version of themselves? How do I empower that sort of positive self-view and change that narrative that we have? Not that people are bombastic or arrogant or overconfident, but just stepping into who they are and celebrating that. And I think if we all just empowered individuals and gave them permission to be just that little bit more confident and accepting of themselves, we would really change the outlook for individuals. We'd change the outlook for teams. We'd change the outlook for organizations. We'd change the outlook for society.
And last question, what one advice would you give to someone who just think about starting using psychometrics?
Do your due diligence. Ask the right questions. There's lots of things that you really should consider. And whoever's providing that assessment to you should be able to answer those. There's lots of tools on the market. We measure personality in a whole range of different ways, and they're suited to a whole range of different end users. So be very deliberate about what you're looking for. Ask the right questions. As I said, do your due diligence around the quality of the tool and the output, and particularly the support that you get. And make sure that as a practitioner or somebody going to use the tool, that you're aware of the limitations. Now, we are, in my view, I'm very biased, a great trait-based Big Five personality tool. But are we everything to everybody? Absolutely not. We are helping people put another tool in their toolbox, not the only tool. And there's an old great saying, which is, if you've only got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it's the same with psychometrics, same with personality inventories, is that if you're using one and trying to use it for everything, it's not going to always work. So good due diligence, look at what's on the market, do some comparisons, make sure that you go through the process yourself. We all provide and introduce a different language. The individual is going to be often the best person to understand whether that language and that process and that method will work in their context.
Fascinating. Do your due diligence. And would you give us one or two just steps for the beginning? What to start from if you're just looking on the market? There are, as you said, a lot of tools. What to start from? What are just one or two or maybe 3 steps from your experience just for the person who is starting and thinking about using psychometrics?
What do you want to get from it?
Okay.
What are you trying to achieve? What are people doing differently with this intervention? When you make an investment, like you do with any development process, not only are you consuming funds, but you're consuming somebody's time. You're also creating a moment of doubt or concern or anxiety for an individual in that process. So be really sure about what you want and what you want to achieve, what you want to be or do by completing that process. Where does it fit in your overall development portfolio and your strategic agenda for your business as well? So find a home for it, not just because you can, but because it's going to actually add value. So create your own little mini business case. And the reason I promote that is because that's what we ask when somebody comes to us and says, oh, can you tell us about Facet5? It's like, okay, well, let's talk about what you need and what you're trying to achieve and where that fits into your bigger picture. And to be honest, we'll sometimes say no because they're not ready. It's not going to add any value. It's just going to create confusion and they're not ready for that information. I think the other part is experience what you are going to ask others to experience. You should be able to get access to the questionnaire and complete it. You should be able to have a good debrief of that profile. You should be able to see how that information is going to be used and where it can't be used in the process that you're looking for. And then ask lots of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Be really sure of what you're looking for and that this is going to fit. Any provider will spend time with you in order to make sure that what you're doing is going to work. It's incumbent on us, I think, as tool providers to make sure that what you're putting into your organization that comes from us is going to work. It's not going to do any harm, and it's there for a reason, and it's doing what it says it's going to do.
I wonder why you are so successful, and what is your definition of success?
It's interesting. Somebody asked me that not so long ago, and the only thing I can come up with is choice. I think success is different for everybody. You know, some people may be more materially oriented, and success is a big home and a lovely car and more holidays. And don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with those. But I think when you peel back a few layers, for me, all through my career, it's about being able to have choice of what I can do, where I can go, what my next steps are. So success for me is about a bit more about choice and freedom. And I think it's okay for that to change as you go through your career, as you go through your lives. Success becomes kind of a horizon view. The horizon always changes as you get further towards it as well. And it's okay to re-examine what that looks like. And I think as we do get older, we do re-examine what success looks like. We become less worried about other people's opinions of us, for example. So maybe we become a bit more focused on what we need and what we value and how we obtain that as our definition of success.
Grant, what's another problem you wish more leaders would use Facet5 for, and what would be the outcome for that?
I think leaders are extremely busy. The capacity of leaders seems to be shrinking, as we said before. There's so much more expectation on leaders to be doing more with less. I think the value in using something like Facet5 is creating that moment of understanding and connection. I often hear about a leader, great leaders always flex their style to everybody that they meet. And for me, that's exhausting. I think it's about how do you create an environment where both people are willing to step into that relationship. So it's not just one person doing all the heavy lifting in creating that. I think we've twisted the view of what great leadership looks like. And if we start to think about how do we create accountability for both parties to turn up as themselves in the right environment and create that, then we create leaders who create the environment for those conversations to understand what motivates you, but also to have more reciprocal agreement around, well, how do we work together? What does that look like? So I think if I'd ask anything of leaders is really to create that space, open up the conversation, have a two-way conversation about what it is to create a great working relationship. What do you need from each other? And through your roles, because they are different in different organizations, how can you enable that? How can you make that happen? A leader will be able to provide different resources and different methods and different ways to enable the individual. And just the other way as well, the individual will be able to bring into the relationship just as much.
So one more question. What do you think is the future of personality assessments?
That's a good question, actually. And I think as a member of the European Test Publishing Group, we've been having that conversation internally as well. And I've been having it with my coach. And I think that there's kind of maybe two divergent paths. But I think then there's one around the AI and the automation and the, that more technical pathway. And we see that, with Facebook and being able to predict somebody's personality based on what photos they look at on social media. And I think then there's the current pathway, the bit more old school, how we measure. It's all very technical. Power is held in the hands of the psychometrician and the psychologist. But actually, I think there's a midpoint. I think personality measures are always about people. It's a very human, very personal process. And it's often the anxiety that we hear, and it's expressed with us around when people do these sort of tests, that they're anxious about what it will tell them or what we know about you in that process. So I think that the mid pathway is about using AI to help us inform and create richer insights from large amounts of data, but using that human method, that human contact, that human mindset in order to grow our business in just a little bit of a different way. Because there's nobody that I have ever met who hasn't valued the time with another person. Innately, we are humans looking for other human contact. So I think when we start to think about personality into the future, I think we have an exciting time ahead with the evolution of AI and how we can inform more accurate, more reliable, more responsive measures. But at its heart, personality has the word person in it. And I think we have to keep that, and I hope we keep that more human-centric element in the assessment process.
Thank you for this conversation, Grant. It was absolutely pleasure to meet with you and to have this conversation. Enjoy your stay in Poland. Do you have any final words to our audience that you would like to share?
I think the only thing is just to be. Let me think about actually what to say, and then you can cut it up into bits. I think the great thing about what we do, it's not about assessment. We're not trying to categorize you. We're not trying to find fault. I think when we genuinely engage with you, we are trying to make you let your brilliance shine. So if you are going into a process using Facet5 or other tools, look at how it can help you, enable you, because you're unique and your personality is unique. And I think when we give people permission to celebrate that, the world is ready for that. There's space in the world for that.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Pleasure.